So this is a presentation on testosterone optimization. This is the without needles component. So last time I did a presentation on the war on masculinity, decreased levels of testosterone, decreased levels of fertility, and estrogen dominance. And that presentation was just focused on presenting the problem, without kind of like going into any detail about the solutions component. That was just the problems, just so that we can be aware of it, because the first step in solving any problem is acknowledging that there is one. So what was the problem that we were trying to acknowledge existed, and what problem was I presenting through research? And it was that hormonal imbalances led by both lifestyle and environmental factors are strong contributors to infertility and decreased well-being amongst millions of men and women. So let's kind of just go through a little bit of a refresher over kind of what that first presentation was like, because we covered a lot. So the first thing we talked about was testosterone. We simply described it as what it is. It's the male primary and secondary sex hormone. It's also found in females. It plays an important role in metabolism, body composition, sexual function, sperm count, cognition, bone density. So sperm is very important, even post puberty. We often associate the secondary characteristics of androgens as the masculinizing ones, like the beard, the facial hair, the acne, the deepening of the voice, all that, the increased muscle. But it's prevalent even into adulthood. And the problem with testosterone in regards to kind of like what trends are happening is that we presented how there's a 50% decrease of testosterone levels in Western nations since the 1960s. So that's just the average of an average male. So that is the red flag that signaled that something is wrong here and something needs to be addressed, whether that be a lifestyle thing or an environmental cause. Then after that, we went into hypogonadism. That is the condition that's triggered by low testosterone. So testosterone levels that are below 350 nanograms per deciliter are considered hypogonadic, but there's multiple factors here. There's still subjective tests as in regards to the symptoms. Then these two things are paired together to create a diagnosis of hypogonadism. So this affects about 4 to 5 million men in the US, and it only has about 5% diagnosis rate. So that means that only 5% of men are actually treated for this condition. And that this is just hypogonadism. There is mild hypogonadotropic hypogonadism, which is the precursor to hypogonadism. And there's a lot more men affected by that and a lot more men that are undiagnosed from that because they are not technically hypogonadic. The one part I missed here was the differentiation between primary and secondary hypogonadism. So the HPT pathway is the hypothalamus pituitary testicular. That's kind of how the stimulation of testosterone happens. The hypothalamus releases gonadotropin releasing hormone. Pituitary receives that, releases FSH, LH, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone. Then the Leydig cells in the testes produce testosterone. The Sertoli cells produce ABP, androgen binding protein. Together, they make sperm. So this kind of leads us into primary hypogonadism is a dysfunction of the first of the testes. So if there's like blunt trauma to the testicles, they're physically incapable of producing testosterone. That's primary hypogonadism. That's not as common, but it occurs. And then secondary hypogonadism, that's the one where there's actual interference with the signaling itself at the H or the P part of the axis. And this is most associated with metabolic conditions such as obesity. So that was the differentiation there between hypogonadism. So after talking about hypogonadism and low testosterone, we also went into the discussion of fertility and oligospermia and azoospermia. Oligospermia, decreased sperm count. Azoospermia, no sperm count. And then how these are related to body composition and decreased testosterone. And they're positive, or they're directly correlated. So if there is a increase of body fat, there is also a decrease of sperm quality, and decrease of testosterone levels within these as well. And that's just the close association between testosterone and sperm, given that they are produced in the same organ, the testicles. Then after that, we kind of went into a little bit of discussion as to why this is even relevant. Like, why should we care about this? And it's because this decreased infertility is leading us to decrease birth rates. So since that 1960s, since the same time frame in which testosterone has been tracked, we've also been tracking birth rate, and that's been decreasing at a rate of that's equal to that of the testosterone levels. So we've gone from 5.4 to 2.6 in that same time. That means that a normal family in the average family worldwide used to have 5.4 kids. Now they have 2.6. The problem with that is that 2.1 is the minimum to sustain a population. And when a kind of country or a society is unable to adequately have enough children to sustain the economy, that's going to lead to social and economic crises. And a lot of countries are already kind of bracing for these. Those countries that have low birth rates, Japan, South Korea, a lot of kind of like industrialized Oriental countries. They're kind of facing this. They have an inverted pyramid in which they have large older population, a even smaller middle age population that is sustaining both the top and bottom being toddlers and like young infants. And the thing is, like, as people age, this pyramid is only going to get wider and wider, making it even more unsustainable to sustain an economy. So that's the problem, and that's a huge crisis, and we don't really think about it much because it's not really going to affect us for, a few decades, a couple decades, but the implications are going to be drastic if something isn't done. Then the last part we talked about here was women reproductive health and the crisis that they're facing. So we talked about how a possible counterargument to the birth rate decline is that women now have more suffrage. Like, they have increased education, they have increased access to contraception, they are out of the household and into the workforce. So can't all these things contribute to the birth rate? And maybe it has nothing to do with reproductive health. And that's not true. That while all those things are positive attributes to what has been occurring, and they may have some effect, there is still a women's reproductive health is under attack. And I just kind of, in that presentation, I posited a few things. The first was obesity and how the prevalence of obesity has increased to 30% during pregnancy, and how this puts the woman and the child at risk of greater complications. Then there was PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. And then this is a condition categorized by irregular menstrual cycles, and how this has increased. I think the statistic was 1 out of every 5 women now suffers from PCOS. And that's, 1 out of every 5 is a pretty prevalent condition, in my opinion. And then the last one here is platelet syndrome, and that was just a discussion on the interaction of hormone disrupting chemicals during pregnancy. Specifically with platelets, we talked about the how this chemical disrupting compound affects the development of the male fetus reproductive system. So men that have been exposed to platelets have less testosterone and less sperm count later on into adulthood. So it's affecting everyone, and it's going to affect further generations further. So that was kind of like the problem. Hopefully that gave us a little bit of a wake-up call as to the lifestyle factors that we can control and those environmental factors that we can't control, but we should still be aware of, so that we can do our due part in managing them as best as we can. This is part 2, the solution. And the solution is testosterone optimization therapy is a multifaceted approach to address low testosterone through lifestyle and pharmacological intervention. So we've probably all heard about testosterone replacement therapy, TRT. Here, I'm just going to kind of like encourage us to redefine the term because testosterone replacement therapy has inherently a couple flaws within the syntax of the words. The first is the basic standardization. So TRT is based on reestablishing normal values, and these values are interdependent, varied, and alter over time. So something that I mentioned in that last presentation was that testosterone values are specifically within lab work. So if you get lab work, the testosterone ranges that are on that are meant to reflect the average of the population. But a population that is averagely unhealthy is going to yield a range that is averagely unhealthy. Therefore, comparing these values to where a person should be is giving you suboptimal levels of where they should be. More so, everyone's completely different. A person that is at 450 nanograms per deciliter test levels total may feel completely different than somebody that's at an 850, and they both feel good, but their levels are different. That's why it's very biospecific, and then there's an interplay of multiple hormones here. You have progesterone, you have estrogen, you have DHT, you have SHBG. To say that it's a simple equation of values, matching values, it's not. There's no standardization here. Everyone is different. And then there's a whole lifestyle component, and that replacement fails to emphasize the importance of lifestyle factors around optimal endocrine function. Like testosterone optimization therapy is what it is, optimization of testosterone. It is not a replacement of, we are not just simply band-aiding the wound that is caused by these lifestyle factors that we neglect. Diet, exercise, recovery, whatever it is. It's supposed to aid synergistically with the lifestyle component. So for our kind of like intents and purposes, I just wanted to redefine it as testosterone optimization therapy, but just know that it's the same thing. Hormone replacement therapy, testosterone replacement therapy, testosterone optimization therapy. I'm referring to the same thing, just the utilization of lifestyle and pharmacological agents in order to optimize our health and endocrine function. So what is testosterone optimization therapy then? The establishment of healthy endocrine function through the synergistic application of lifestyle factors and exogenous supplementation of hormones. So what are these lifestyle factors? We have dietary intake, activity level and resistance training, sleep and stress management, insulin management, substance control, supplementation, product selection. And then at the very end, we have pharmacological agents. So you see the importance of testosterone optimization relies on everything else that came before it, and pharmacological agents are there to just help ameliorate certain conditions that simply could not be reversed because of the lifestyle changes, because of the lifestyle factors just simply weren't enough to get a person to function optimally. And then that could be due to the environmental factors that we sometimes don't have any control over. This part right here is going to be testosterone inhibitors. And these are the things that decrease testosterone, or that they have some interaction with estrogen, which in a way decreases testosterone. Ultimately, it leads to the same thing: less testosterone, more estrogen dominance. So first, let's go over the lifestyle factors. And this might sound like a little bit of review from the last one, but I just wanted to kind of like make sure that we understand this concept and understand how these hormones, how endocrine function, how proper liver detoxification, how gut health all matter in relation to the hormones. It's all interrelated. To pinpoint and say this is the root cause, it's a little bit hard because they affect each other. So one of the main causes of low testosterone is estrogen dominance. And there can be a lot of things that lead to estrogen dominance. First one is excess aromatization. So the aromatase enzyme is the one that converts testosterone into estrogen. And then this is present in adipose fat cells. So the more adipose fat cells we have, the more aromatase enzyme, and then the more conversion we have of testosterone into estrogen. So people that have high body fat, they tend to have high levels of estrogen because of this excess aromatization that is occurring. And in even cases of mild gonadotropin hypogonadism, we see that we can kind of see what is happening in terms of these hormones and the negative feedback loop that occurs. So whenever there's the body senses high estrogen, it's like, well, we have to decrease the amount of estrogen, and we know testosterone aromatizes into estrogen, so somehow we have to cut this loop here. So how does it do it? It does it by decreasing gonadotropin releasing hormone, decreasing LH, decreasing FSH, and then that decreases testosterone. That should decrease the amount of compounds, molecules able to convert into estrogen, bringing down those levels. That is kind of like what the body is trying to do in that situation. And that's not exactly how it always pans out, but that's just what we see in these cases. And then the second one is detoxification. So the liver is the main detoxifier of estrogen. It kind of gets rid of it through feces or urine, and it does so in 3 phases. And the first phase is hydrolyzation. The second phase is methylation, and then the third phase is excretion through feces or urine. So the first part is actually the one that I want to focus on the most, this process of hydrolyzation, because estrogen is important, but another thing that's important are the metabolites that come after estrogen. And these are the metabolites. The pathway that they go into when they go into hydrolyzation matters. So from the last presentation, you might have remembered that we noted how it could convert into 2-OH, 4-OH, and 16-OH. And each of these follows its own kind of little path through to excretion or some other end product. So that 2-OH, that's the one we want. That because that 2-OH then goes into that phase 2 methylation, where it becomes a metabolite that is super cardioprotective, super neuroprotective. It's a really good metabolite. We love that. And so we want to increase estrogen going down that pathway. And then there's that 16-OH. The 16-OH, it's not as dangerous, but it does have a few more steps. So it just kind of keeps estrogen and its metabolites in the kind of the liver for a longer period of time, and it's not as direct of an excretion method. So it's not optimal, but it's not hugely detrimental. But the one that is the 4-OH. This 4-OH pathway can lead to they're called depurinating adducts, and these are little things that kind of like copy DNA, and when they copy DNA, they kind of stick to the DNA, and if they kind of copy it wrong and they stick to it, then the chemicals that come by and spell check DNA are unable to spell check the DNA. So here they have a mutation, and mutations cause cancers. General term for cancer, not like as any specific cancer. So that's why we don't want the 4-OH. And this 4-OH is directly related to leptin. Leptin is a hormone that is released by fat cells. So more fat means more leptin, means more 4-OH. That means that more estrogen is converted through that, and we don't want that literally we just said how that causes mutations that lead to cancers, or kind of like more serious conditions. And then we kind of like concluded by talking about alcohol and just how alcohol in of itself increases estrogen as low as like 1 standard size drink per day. And I mean, just think about what alcohol is. Alcohol is a toxin. The state of inebriation is it acting as what it is, a toxin, and our body has to process that toxin, and the liver has to process that toxin. So if it has to process this ethanol and it also has to process all this estrogen, we're giving a lot of a workload, and it's probably not going to do both of its jobs well. So just don't make it worse on the liver. Don't make it work harder than it has to. And then the last part within this was gut dysbiosis, which also relates to alcohol. Alcohol, processed foods, but we have this thing called the estrobolome. The estrobolome are bacteria that produce enzymes that interact with the estrogen. So specifically beta-glucuronidase and steroid sulfatase. So beta-glucuronidase is an enzyme that decleaves the kind of like a vesicle of estrogen. So once it's ready to be excreted, beta-glucuronidase comes around and like basically opens up the vesicle so that the estrogen can escape and be reabsorbed back into the system. We just talked about why we don't want that. We kind of the liver worked hard to process this estrogen and excrete it. Why are we bringing it back into the system? And then steroid sulfatase converts estrone sulfatase into estrone, that's E1, and DHEAS into DHEA. Estrone is a type of estrogen, so it's just an active form of, and DHEAS is the inactive form of DHEA. DHEA is a precursor to testosterone, estrogen, pregnenolone, DHT. So it comes all before this. So if this has the potential of kind of leading more into that pathway that increases aromatization. So for males specifically, increasing DHEA doesn't lead to increased testosterone. Most of the time, it just leads to more increased estrogen levels. So that's why we don't want more of the active form of DHEA. That all has to do with gut biome. So we can see how estrogen dominance is kind of like something that we should be cautious of, like the processing of estrogen through detoxification, the creation of estrogen through aromatization and maintaining body fat. And then we have all the environmental factors. So within the environmental factors, we have this concept of socioeconomic status and how this ties in with hormone disrupting chemicals. So if you are of a high socioeconomic status, you have different access to different types of foods, different types of products, different types of facilities. You have less stress. All of these things matter in regards to hormones. If you're able to buy organic, grass-fed, we're going to talk about kind of all of these in a little bit more detail during the next slides where we talk about agonists of testosterone. But I kind of just want to go over like these few important chemical disrupting compounds. So platelets, we already talked about and how they affect the development of the fetus and its reproductive tract. Then we have BPAs and BPAs, BPS, BPF, which are the cousins of these compounds. So if you have a bottle that's BPA free, just know that it actually has BPS or BPF. So it's not actually free of these chemicals. And then these also act as estrogens. And then we have nonylphenols and octaphenyls, and this is the most common pollutant in water, and it has been shown to decrease reproductive function within wildlife. So we're definitely constantly bombarded with these hormone disrupting chemicals. We're almost like a chemical processing plant. Now, this is the part, testosterone agonist. These are the things that increase testosterone. And I'm just going to separate it into the different types of pillars of fitness, nutrition, training, and recovery, just because that's like the best way I can see. I can kind of like outline this. But within nutrition, there are a few things we have to keep track of and a few things that we can do to help improve testosterone levels. The first one is live a insulin managed lifestyle. So insulin is a double whammy against testosterone. One, because insulin, and specifically insulin resistance, increases body fat, which increases aromatization. So it increases estrogen that way. And then it also decreases SHBG, insulin does. So sex hormone binding globulin is what attaches to estrogen so that it becomes sort of inactive. But when we have low SHBG, guess what? That estrogen is now free and it is unbound and it become active in tissue. So it can kind of set off its effects. So it kind of, that has a double whammy effect of where we don't want either of those things to occur. And then we have quality fats and protein, something that we can start implementing into our diet. And nobody said it best than John Meadows when he said in one of his articles, it's not what you eat, it's what you eat has eaten. So food that so kind of animals that have been fed their natural diet have a much better quality of fats and protein. And he gave a few examples in this article. He talked about cattle, grass-fed beef versus grain-fed beef. And within this one, he noted how grass-fed beef had a 1-to-1 ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 within the fat. So omega-3 is known as the good type of polyunsaturated fats. It reduces inflammation, and then omega-6 is a pro-inflammatory. So it increases inflammation. So this has a more positive ratio of where they're more balanced. Grass-fed beef does. And the problem with grain-fed beef is that this ratio is thrown off. So it has more omega-6 rather than omega-3. Also, because grain is a little bit more acidic when it is digested, this increased acidosis leads to kind of breaks in the lumen, and these breaks allow there to be leakage from the GI system into the circulating system of the cattle. This leads to infections, and then they have to use antibiotics on the cattle, antibiotics which are then consumed through the meat. So we also don't want that as well. And then he just gave a few more examples in regards to like wild caught salmon, for example. Wild caught salmon is supposed to have like an orangey look to it because of the food that's ingested. But farm-raised salmon is actually pale and it's opaque, and they use sometimes dye to mimic or to fool the customer into thinking that it's somewhat natural or organic, but it isn't. It's not at all the same thing. Wild caught salmon and farm-raised salmon. And then pasture-raised eggs as well. So like the yolk, you want a yolk that's orange. That just means it has more vitamins and micronutrients within it. So the more orange it is, the better quality and the better fat quality it has. So that's just something to note there. And then the reduction of processed foods and artificial sweeteners. So processed foods are known to increase gut dysbiosis. So they tend to increase the proliferation of harmful bacteria or bacteria that kind of overtake the other microbiomes. And this is called opportunistic bacteria. And then this leads to low-grade chronic inflammation. Low-grade chronic inflammation is anything that's chronic and anything that's inflammation is not a good thing for the body. So we never like being in a state of chronic inflammation, as this leads to insulin resistance, as this leads to other conditions that can lead to low testosterone in that way as well. So that's kind of what we have to steer away from those. And that was just it's in specific to the processed foods, the hyper palatable processed foods. And then also with the discussion of artificial sweeteners, I just kind of wanted to note this, but from the research, I couldn't find a direct correlation to estrogen or testosterone decrease, estrogen increase from artificial sweeteners. The best thing I found was that there is some correlation that aspartame does increase estrogen and decrease testosterone, but the dose that was used in that kind of study was equal to 32 cans of diet soda per day. So I don't think anybody's drinking 32 cans of diet soda. So we can't really make a concluding statement there. But I did want to also just kind of note that in regards to what I've been taught by Matt Jansen and Justin Mahaley, different kind of coaches is that they pull artificial sweeteners 2 to 3 weeks out from a competition stage date. And the reason they do so is because they notice a reduction in water retention. And water retention is a side effect of estrogen. So whether there is an interaction there with estrogen or if it's just something else, inflammation, I don't know, but there is a correlation there, and artificial sweeteners do have some effect in regards to that. Just take that with a grain of salt, but it's just something I wanted to note. The science isn't completely clear on everything out there, but we can deduce our own thoughts from anecdotal evidence, things that we experience. We don't need an article to prove it to us to know that, hey, something's up with this. So that's just the testosterone agonist in terms of nutrition. Let's go over to testosterone agonists in terms of training. So heavy resistance training. So we know that there's a positive association between lean tissue, body composition, and the effects thereof with metabolic upregulation, insulin sensitivity. Like, these things are all well known. We know that having a more positive body composition leads more like leaner, better shape, leads to a better, more functional body. I don't think I have to find any specific citations for that. We kind of all see that through our own experimentation or our own going about life. Then we also have proper energetics. So proper energetics is multifaceted. It's not about just having a good body composition. It's not about muscle mass. It's about proper pulmonary function, proper heart function, general organ function needs to be optimal. So as bodybuilders, we have this thing where we're aesthetic. We like to look good, but a lot of the time we neglect that aspect of, are we actually feeling good though? Are we internally healthy? That is a completely different discussion. And that is what I want to talk about with proper energetics. And that there is both anaerobic and aerobic efficiency. So as bodybuilders, we're trained to do anaerobic work. A set of resistance, a set is anaerobic. And we often neglect that aerobic, the cardio component, just because we consider it to be counterproductive to our goals. However, it's also neglecting the heart. It's also neglecting pulmonary health. It's also neglecting lipid levels. Like it has benefits there. We need to be a well-rounded athlete. And then something we also don't do a lot of is HIIT. And even though HIIT is anaerobic and resistance training is anaerobic, it is not performed at the same intensities. Like a set is probably not the same thing as HIIT. It's high intensity, but it is not to the same degree. Therefore, we kind of need to make sure that we work in all aspects of energetics here. And then there is average daily activity. And then this is not to say more steps equals higher testosterone. Like, it's not like, hey, if you hit 10,000 steps, you're going to increase your testosterone. But this is just to show that there is an association between activity and testosterone levels. So it might be that the person that does 10,000 steps is just a generally more active person that has a lower body composition, less body fat, so then they have more testosterone. This was just to show that, hey, sometimes the best thing we can do is to just get out there and walk, take some steps. That's like the first measure we can implement in order to kind of reverse these effects if we really don't know where to start, if everything else seems a little bit too drastic. And then the last component here was recovery. And the first one and most important one is sleep. So the effects of sleep were actually the effects of improper sleep or sleep reduction, going from 7 to 5 hours in 1 week, were actually seen to decrease testosterone 10 to 15% in young adult males. So that was just 1 week, 1 week of sleep deprivation in a way. And 5 hours is what a lot of people get on average. So that was matching the conditions a lot of people live in. And that was a 10 to 15% reduction in just a week. Now, could you imagine this over a chronic period of time where a person has irregular circadian cycle because of work because of third shift, because they simply can't get off their phone at 2 a.m. in the morning, like whatever it is, it's leading to worse complications down the line in terms of their endocrine function. And then we have sleep management. So cortisol is a stress hormone that's released by the body, and it's also the precursor. It's made from the same precursor as pregnenolone, or progesterone, sorry. So progesterone and cortisol are made from the same precursor. So if we have a high demand of cortisol, that means that there can be less of a supply for the building block to make progesterone, which can then affect the levels of hormones that we have. So that's why cortisol management is also a big thing, and inflammation is also a big thing. So whenever I say inflammation, just know that it's a general term, but it's kind of not specific to one organ, one function, one condition. It matters for everything. So inflammation increases the conversion of T3 to RT3, reverse T3. Inflammation decreases insulin sensitivity. So inflammation just does a lot of things. So we generally don't want to be in a chronically inflamed state. And that's what being in a chronically stressed state, having high chronic cortisol does. So that's kind of why we want to manage stress as well. And then the last part here is supplementation. And this is just specifically in terms of deficiencies. And I'm not talking about like testosterone boosters here. I'm talking about like the micronutrients that aid the processes that either clear unwanted metabolites or increase wanted metabolites. So here we have the example of like TUDCA. And then this is an aid in liver detoxification. So this is a supplement that if we know our liver is, has high liver enzymes because it's processing estrogen, and we also, we have underlying conditions that force it, fatty liver disease, to kind of work in this way, we can implement TUDCA to ameliorate this and aid the liver in its regeneration and detoxification of these products. And then biotin, another one. So biotin acts as a coenzyme in the production of testosterone. And people that have diets that have processed foods or that have chronic deficits don't have enough food intake to supplement this biotin to make it necessary to have enough biotin to produce the necessary testosterone. So the body works with a limiting reactant kind of concept here. So it can only produce as much as the minimum amount of whatever product it needs for the process. So if it doesn't have enough biotin, that becomes the minimum reactant. So that it's then dependent on how much biotin we have. So kind of supplementing and making sure we have enough of these precursors can ensure that we have proper hormonal function throughout, and we can properly, produce these hormones. So that's the recovery component. That's the general presentation on lifestyle factors. The next presentation, as I talked about, was going to be the with needles component, in which we're going to talk about testosterone optimization therapy in regards to the implementation of actual exogenous hormones. And that's going to be also a little bit more pertinent to the bodybuilder as well, because TRT is something, or TOT, testosterone optimization, TRT, replacement dosage of testosterone, is something that you are going to live with most of your life, if not all your life, depending upon the level of competition that you're at or that you seek to be at. So if you found this information to be helpful, then I encourage you to give it a like and leave a comment with a future topic that you'd like me to discuss a little bit more in depth in a future episode. And like always, I encourage us to share knowledge.